Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ngozi Okose. I am the Director of Culture, Diversity, and Inclusion of Harvard Alumni for Mental Health, short form called HAM, Harvard Alumni for Mental Health. I'd like to welcome you all and thank everybody for making our time to be with us on this important and unusual topic of discussion. This event is co-planned by Harvard Alumni for Mental Health and Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth and Dartmouth College. I'll first of all introduce Harvard Alumni for Mental Health. This is a special interest group of Harvard alumni that was created in 2014 and became a nonprofit in 2017. Our mission is to connect alumni and students and their families to create a network of support and engagement that expands mental health awareness and access across the globe. In 2020, a COVID task force was launched to design a series of community-informed events and programs to better support the worldwide community of Harvard alumni and their families. This effort led to a rapid expansion of our activities. Today, we are excited to offer weekly events designed both for mental health professionals and for members of the community. If you check out our website, you'll see upcoming events, please. For clinicians, we offer a consultation group and monthly didactics. For community members, we offer events designed to lower the stigma around mental health, such as our advocacy series where members of the community share their experiences. We also aim to facilitate access to care through a network of discounted mental health services and a growing network of culturally competent providers for our multicultural community. Our events are free and open to all. You can read or hear about them by subscribing to our monthly newsletter or by following us on social media or by checking out our event section of our website. By the end of this event, we are going to post all the links that we need. Many times when we hold our events, we partner with alumni organizations or other bodies to co-sponsor some of our events. A few months ago, we partnered with the French Consulate and Harvard Alumni of Paris to sponsor an event of being French in America. A couple of months ago also, we partnered with Harvard Business School alumni of Toronto. And today, we are so proud to partner with, to collaborate with Dartmouth University and Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. I will now let Heather Law, Associate Director, Alumni Career Services of Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth, to give us a brief about Dartmouth.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ngozi. We are so honored to be here, both my wonderful colleague, Sarah DiGiacomo, as well as myself, representing Tuck, the Tuck School of Business of Dartmouth Office of Career Services and Alumni Career Services are really honored to partner with Harvard as well as Dartmouth. For those of you who are Tuck alumni or current students, we offer a plethora of resources to you, both from a professional development and career standpoint. So we encourage you to check out the MyTuck website as well as Tuck Recruiting for more information on resources and upcoming programs. So just know that this is just a wonderful example of one of the many programs and resources that we offer to you as a part of the Tuck community. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Sarah, who is going to introduce our speakers.
Heather, I'm so excited and honored to introduce our speakers for today's panel. We have Damali Harding. Damali Harding is an expert in the field of renewable energy and electric utilities. Harding has provided strategic advising to utilities such as Duke Energy, National Grid, and other major domestic and international energy companies. Harding holds an MBA from the Tuck School of Business and a BA from Dartmouth College. She has been coaching and mentoring for over 15 years, and in her spare time, works passionately to eradicate energy poverty. Damali lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband, daughter, and several adorable rescue animals. Embry Thompson. Embry is a current medical student at Weill Cornell Medicine and scientific director of HUMP. Embry graduated from Harvard, where she concentrated in molecular and cellular biology and economics. She has worked at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute as a researcher in gynecologic oncology, helping women cope with the physical, psychological, and emotional burden of cancer through digital health innovations, and will continue quality of life research at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. And finally, we have Dr. Nitzi, a clinical psychologist and the president of HUMP. With 2 PhDs, Dr. Nitzi has led international research at Harvard for 10 years before moving to Dartmouth. Her research on identity and resilience has led to several breakthroughs in the care of high achievers, from college students and athletes to top executives in the midst of career transitions, and to professionals and expats navigating multicultural workplaces. In her private practice at Precision Psychology, she provides both therapy and neuropsychological assessments to English and French speakers. So thank you so much to all the panelists for being here. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Ngozi.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Heather. Yeah, we are now ready to start the day's program, and we appreciate you all for being a part of this. The topic of our conversation today is imposter syndrome. This is a very unusual topic with a far-reaching ramification for our mental health wellness. Today, we're going to explore the stress that this could create in a person's psyche as he or she navigates through the challenges of day-to-day living. Many times we feel not enough. We feel, or we feel like we're like fraud, and we hide even when we should be shining. We don't want to appreciate our strengths. We play down on our strengths and pull up our weaknesses, but we are very quick to pull up other people's strengths. We feel unsure of who we are or what we are at different times. We feel very undeserving. And this thing happens to us, not just in academic, it happens in personal and professional realms. And it also has a very, very severe mental health consequence, even though it's not yet labeled as a mental health condition. Please, let's all join our team of experts today. They've been introduced to discuss the signs, risks, cultural factors, and mental health impact and ways to overcome this syndrome. You know, many times we think about this, and prior to getting this organized, whenever we think about imposter syndrome, we always think about college. I want our speakers to explain to us, is it college? I know when I was introducing, I said professional and academic and personal, but it seems to be more significant or picked up when we're in college. Dr. Marie-Christine, can you give us an idea? Is it an early adult college issue, or does this extend beyond that?
Thank you, Ngozi. I think we're here to speak to the multiple facets of what we call the imposter syndrome. And perhaps one of the reasons that it emerges in college, or we become aware of it more acutely in college, is that it's a time when all of a sudden a lot of students who are high performers, who are high achievers, who are used to be at the top of their class in their high schools, all of a sudden come together. And that's what happens when you have a very high team, very good teams. All of a sudden you're on par with others, as opposed to having your social surroundings being that you are used to. It's also a moment when a number of psychological patterns tend to emerge in early adulthood. And if we look at the values in the system at the time that we're surrounded by in college, it's often a time when it's easy to ping our self-worth on external validations like grades and awards. And you turn in a paper, you feel good. And then you see this pattern where the anxiety starts emerging again until you have the reassurance of the external validation. Now, I think you pointed to very quickly and very astutely how this pattern that may take its place or manifest most strongly for the first time around college is something that we can take with us post-graduation. And when we bring this pattern, we can bring the imposter syndrome with us in the workplace, and as you were hinted at, also in our relationships. And we're hoping that this event helps us name it, recognize it, to empower you to make those changes and invest in your sense of self-worth in ways that might be more sustaining than outside validation.
Thank you, Dr. Christine. Dr. Christine is also bringing her wealth of knowledge from France. We'll see later if culture is also a factor. But Marie-Christine, do you have some, Ombre, please, you are still fresh from college. And you're in college, in professional school. Can you please wade into this? You know, is it just a college, early college or early adult issue, or do you have something to add to it?
So I can't personally answer if it's just a college or school issue, since I haven't like left that territory yet, but currently living in that territory. It's still here, still fresh, still experiencing it. And especially like when attending like elite higher education institutions, it's exactly like Dr. Nitsi mentioned about, you know, coming from an environment where you were like maybe at the top of your class or considered the best at doing something, and then you're suddenly in an environment where everyone is the best, which for you feels like, oh, I'm just average or I'm not exceptional anymore. And you, and coming from that environment, you also are used to people like giving you praise all the time, telling you how exceptional you are, and then it's just, it kind of, for the time being, it feels like it's like fading or something. And so it definitely does have like a psychological impact, self-perception, and like just like self-esteem, I guess, in trying to overcome and name what that is, I think is really important. So I'm glad that we're having events like this. And then there are other kinds of imposter syndrome I'm experiencing in medical school now, going from being, I don't know, I guess just a civilian or just a young person, and then being confronted with, or just being in the presence of very serious, very intimate and private conversations, and feeling as though I'm like, what have I done to deserve to listen to you discuss this very private, you know, situation or health issue, things that you were always told you couldn't really listen to, or you should, you know, avert your eyes or ears. And now it's my duty to listen to those things. So that's a new territory for me, and hoping to discuss that later.
Oh, awesome. It's always great to get a good experience, you know, first-hand experience. And we have Damali, who is also coming from the workplace, from industry. Let's get her perspective on whether this is early adult or college issue. She's been through all of those, so I believe that she's going to give us.
Yeah, it is absolutely not just a college issue. Not just yesterday, a good friend of mine got a job offer, you know, at the salary she wanted, everything she wanted. And she literally texted, I hope I don't mess this up. And I'm so scared. And, you know, she has 20 plus years of experience in her field, been published, you know, the whole nine. And so it is absolutely something that shows up in workplaces. It shows up, where we tend to see it a lot is in transition. So promotions, new jobs, new locations. I actually started getting into this while I have a psychology undergraduate major. What really prompted me to start investigating was my own experience attending Tuck. So when I went to Tuck, you know, same thing Embry said, like all of these people are amazing. They're doing all of these wonderful things. You're like, I remember the dean saying to me, "You're not a mistake," right? "You're not a mistake." And that really stuck to me, but I wanted to understand why I was feeling this way. Like what was it about the experience? And then noticing, as I got promoted or as I moved into new roles, particularly when you start moving into supervisory roles, where responsibility falls on you, where people's livelihoods fall on you, it can really be a lot of stress. And you start to wonder, why am I in this position? Do I deserve to be here making these decisions about people? And so it is absolutely something that happens throughout your life, different strengths. Sometimes it's milder, sometimes it's stronger. But one of the things as you move through life, particularly if you start working with colleagues, is make sure that you're aware that colleagues can be feeling like this, right? So make sure that if you're, in a position of leadership, you're helping to train and prepare your leaders to take on new roles. Make sure that you're preparing people to take on new responsibilities. That's something that a lot of companies, quite frankly, don't do well. They promote people and say, have at it. So that helps minimize a lot of the experiences and feelings that people are having.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's awesome. Seeing it from the industry perspective. Awesome. Now, it seems that this imposter syndrome has become more of an issue recently. Why didn't we hear much about it earlier than now? Can you let us know what could be the issue or recent happenings that could make it so prevalent? I'm in private practice. I'm a psychotherapist in private practice in Houston, Texas. And I know that I see a lot of clients now, and it's always their problem. One of my clients actually invited me to her white coat ceremony. She was so anxious and nervous, she didn't feel she qualified to get into med school. At the white coat ceremony, when the dean got up there, the dean just repeated what Damali just said. "We want to tell you that you're not a mistake. We want to tell you that's how she started, that you're qualified to be here. It doesn't matter which environment, we screened you very well and you're very qualified." So it's just amazing that it's come to the fore, this issue of imposter syndrome. Can you, our panelists, can you kind of touch on that and tell us what could be happening that's making everybody feel like they are not enough or they are not good enough? Marie-Christine, can you help us first?
Sure. I think we've had conversations, right, in preparing this panel today, and also we've all been in different roles with students, with trainees, with younger professionals, and in mentorship roles. And I think there are two factors that I've seen perhaps contribute to this greater awareness or perhaps greater emergence of imposter syndrome. And one thing that we've noticed over the past decade is how much of an accelerated life we're living, where you have all of these kind of systemic factors in school, in the workplace, that spread us very thin, right? Even a college student today has so much on their plate, and they have this pressure to perform in every one of them, every one of these roles. And so there's this busy culture, right? And in particular, for the cultural contrast, perhaps, that you are hinted at, moving to the United States, all of a sudden having a pressure to answer emails within the day, if not within the hour, right? And you're always on to the next thing. And I see a lot of that accelerated life pace kind of shrinking the time we have to appreciate what we just accomplished. You turn an essay and the first question is, what's next? Like, what do I have to do next? And you don't get to appreciate, to enjoy, to celebrate, to take in, importantly, the accomplishment for yourself of like, okay, I have done this. And if you don't have that time to really take it in, how will your sense of competency grow? You never have the time to reflect and to acknowledge what you have accomplished. You're just going to the next thing. And so I feel like perhaps in that acceleration and those pressures to perform on all these different roles stretching us too thin, it leaves us little space for processing and for catching, for our sense of self-worth, our sense of competency to catch up as to what we're doing. And so that acceleration is one thing that is often at the forefront of my mind, that I see, that I try to temper a little bit when I work with mentors or with students. And the second one that I think you see more when we talk about that transition. I think Damali really made a great point about how this imposter syndrome often surges and flares up in times of transition. And I think when you look at the education system, we've kind of prolonged the juvenile phase of our life up to middle age, right? Like you're in school, you're a trainee for so much longer, that pushing back all of the milestone that we have in mind as expectations for what it's like to be settled, perhaps involving having a job, perhaps involving home ownership, or having a certain family status, whether it's being married, having started a family, whichever it might be, that we've inherited from multi-generational structures from previous generations who started those milestones so much earlier than we do, with the prolongation of school and of that trainee phase, where there's also a very concrete implication in terms of the income, right? You're on a trainee income, you may not be able to achieve those milestones because you don't have the ability to accrue wealth. Whereas if you started work earlier, perhaps you would. And so I think there's a discrepancy between what we consider success that we've seen in previous generation and what our current generations are able to achieve at the same age. And I often think about these two things, the accelerated life pace and that discrepancy in ability to reach milestones as shifts that probably contribute to making the imposter syndrome more vivid for recent generations.
Awesome, thank you, Marie. And Ambre, is there something you need to add to that?
I totally agree with the high pace at which we're like constantly striving to do and achieve the next thing and not focusing on our like current achievements or past achievements. Because I feel like or at least in America, I can only speak for America, and I've I've gone to other countries where I feel like, the pace might be like not, money isn't the like the standard of just like living in happiness as much as it is in the US. And I think that definitely contributes to this culture of gotta get the next thing, gotta get the next thing, gotta get the next thing. And even in resumes, I hear people or friends who say like, oh, you can't take a break, because if you take a break and there's a gap in your resume, your employer is gonna ask, oh, what were you doing? And if you say you were resting, that doesn't sound good. And we don't prioritize rest or, introspection or self-reflection. And I think that definitely contributes to the issue. Something else that I find that contributes to, like, from personal experience is obviously this is a like a very current conversation, but the lack of like gender and racial like representation within certain fields, and the feeling of loneliness or isolation, and coming from like being a gender and like racial minority, especially in the medical space. Like in my medical class, there are 106 students, and there are only nine Black students, and 5 of which are female identifying. And so it can feel really isolating if you're having if you're feeling these feelings, and you also have this additional factor of not having really anyone to talk to about it or a few people to talk to about it. And that's definitely a key factor in having mentors who you can talk to. Like Dr. Nitsi is one of my mentors, and we definitely have had conversations that I feel like have changed the course of like my thinking about myself and about my future and about my career, my sense of belonging. Yeah, I think there's definitely pressure for these institutions to invite like women and people of color, non-binary people, but there's the diversity, but there's a lack of inclusion. So that's why the diversity and inclusion part is they go together for a reason, because you can be in a place and you can maybe see other people who do look like you, but do you feel like you are included in that culture of that space? that's another like conversation to have. And I feel like there's definitely more work to be done there. So
yeah, more work to be done. I see the way Damali is smiling. She will bring us up to par at what's happening in the
So one thing I think I want to acknowledge is that, like, I actually hate the term imposter syndrome, right? Because it creates this thing that something's wrong with you, right? And so one of the things I think I want to reemphasize is that these are normal feelings that people have that are high performers, or they're going into new spaces. And again, some of the things that Embry talked about, some of the things that Marie-Christine talked about, you know, we may be younger, we may be, you know, the only woman. I work in energy, so very frequently I've been the youngest, I've been the only woman, I've been the, there's generally more people of color, but I've been in those spaces. But that is not limited to those spaces, right? I have been in spaces, and I'll tell, like, I'm organizing a luncheon for Black women in energy. Those women look like me, but it's still amazing, like, that I'm invited to the table. To me, I'm like, yeah, wait, you know, I have to come back and say, yeah, I deserve to be here. And so I just want to make sure that we identify and say, one, that, you know, this is not something that's wrong with you. This is not something that has to be fixed. This is something that I think why we're seeing more people talk about it is that we're starting to see more people start to take these steps towards introspection, right? And some of that's driven by social media. I've seen more Instagram accounts about depression, anxiety, you know, ADHD in adults. What does it feel like to talk about your trauma? What does it feel like to talk about your healing? What does that mean? What are the impacts of that in your life? And so I think as more people start to feel, you know, one of the things that happens with the imposter syndrome is people feel isolated. And I've seen more people kind of, I don't want to say snap out of it, but start to really get ahead by simply just acknowledging that you are not the only one that feels this way, and you're not alone in this feeling, and that there's support for you, there's ways to understand, and there's ways to, like, you know, actions you can take, and we'll talk about some of those later. But, you know, just make sure that we understand that this is not like a defect, right? We're not talking abnormal psychology here.
Thank you, Damali. Thank you, Damali and Umbre, for taking us to the next level, which is kind of looking at what predisposes us to this syndrome. And Damali, I like it that you brought it up, that it's not a mental health, it's not a condition yet, okay? It's a situation that we're in, which in its extreme form can actually lead to a mental health problem. In its extreme form, it can lead to anxiety, it can lead to depression, but part of our purpose for organizing this is to create awareness of mental wellness, in which case we have to catch ourselves early so that things do not degenerate. And I know that Marie-Christine will also, I like the cultural part that's being brought in, and Marie-Christine, as an immigrant too from France, I know she must have also had a lot of spaces here in the US where she looks like so many people will think, but she also has had some of this feeling of not enough. I don't know if she did, but there could be situations that would have lended to, but maybe because of her double degree in psychology, she would be able to handle that. So Marie, let's hear from you.
Oh, you would think, right? Well, I'll give you a moment of vulnerability right there. So many times till to this day, right, I've received the advice to remove all of my degrees from France because they were not acquired in the US, so we don't know what they mean. And I mean like 3 masters and a PhD, right? Just remove it from the PhD. It doesn't count. Anything you did before the US just doesn't count. Or, oh, well, but we're not sure, you know, the level of this. So you actually have to redo a second PhD, or you have to re-credential and re-get all of these hours because we're not going to recognize any of the prior training, or we're making a job offer at an entry level despite the 16 years of experience, right? And I know that I'm far from being alone in that experience, which I think and other immigrants have far many more barriers to face than I have had, but in being privileged to working with some of them and to helping them tap into the network, the support, the resources that can help bolster their sense of competency to go get the job, as Damali was saying, with the salary that they deserve, acknowledging the competency and the richness that they bring in the environment. I've worked with so many immigrants who feel like essentially they're putting a lot of effort to assimilate and to already speak and take in a lot of cultural differences. And in that, have the double effort to have to filter out a lot of passive aggressive or sometimes not even passive aggressive messages of like, you're not by our standards and you need to deny, you need to cut out all of those parts of you. At the same time as there is an increase in the public messaging around welcoming diversity and valuing the richness, especially in academia, right? In science, where we know the value of these different perspectives. And yet, you know, many of the students or the executives that I work with who are expats who come in for a mission in a different country find themselves having these undermining feelings to their sense of self-worth and their sense of competency. And especially when they're in an executive role, they're no longer in college, right? Don't always recognize the sources of these internalized negative messages, right? And invalidated messages that they might be getting as immigrants. And so, yeah, I know there are many, many aspects to the diversity phases of the way the imposter syndrome is manifested towards different identities. That's one that I felt like I've worked with clients that I could comment on a little bit more.
Thank you very much. And thank you for being very explicit and using your personal experience. And I bet most of us here, we have people logging from every continent of the world right now. And many of us who have been in different countries, anyway, not necessarily the US, we've had situations where we start self-doubting. Some of us, I started my training in Nigeria, and then I did some training in France, and I came here and I went through the same thing Marie-Christine is going through. And even 30 years after this, by the end of this, I'll be 30 years in the US. You know, at some point you still have that feel a little bit. But I'm also wondering, you know, some people go through this, they come out strong. Others go through this, they crumble. They are beset with anxiety, they are beset with depression, very low self-esteem. They can't even get going. At the end of the day, they don't maximize their potential. I throw it to the panelists. Any one of you can take this. Do you think there's any personality trait that predisposes one to this syndrome?
I'll take that. So I, like I said, did a lot of research and, you know, use my psychology degree to understand the research. And, you know, I don't think so, right? I think it's one of those things that you have such different variations, different experiences, different triggers. You know, coming back to the cultural piece of it, there is a huge cultural piece where, you know, people may be in positions where they're fighting. We talked about academia. STEM is another huge piece. Talk to women, and I work for a tech company. You know, if you talk to the women, it is very hard and very difficult. Again, we talked about being the only, and those feelings are, you know, validated because you're constantly being questioned, you're constantly being told, you know, do you have this experience? And you're like, you mean in the degree? I think we're all familiar with the term mansplaining and what that means, and having that, you know, occur. And so I don't think that there's a predisposition, you know, there's not a genetic, there's not, you know, I think there were some questions around attachment styles. It's such a wide variety. And you can look at, you know, if you start looking even anecdotally, you know, people talking about essays, and you have women executives, you know, who've talked about their experiences, and they're running Fortune 500 companies, you know, women who are very, very successful, or you have underrepresented minorities here in the US, again, talking about their experiences, writing books, you know, giving talks and saying, you know, that these are the things that happen to me. And so it's very, very common and very, very wide.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, Marie, do you have anything, Ombre, to add to this?
I want to give an opportunity to Amber. I feel like I've talked a lot.
Okay. Ombre, do you have something to add to it? Just bring that question up.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm not a psychologist, so I don't have as grounded an opinion, but
Yeah.
I definitely think that imposter syndrome can manifest in a lot of different ways. Like, I think on the surface, one might think that someone who is lacking maybe self-confidence or self-esteem might be more likely to struggle, but you can also find that in like people who are or seemingly very confident, and like when you look a little closer, you can see like, oh, maybe this is like a mechanism of like overcompensation or feeling like you're not doing enough at any one time. So yeah, I don't think that any one personality or characteristic or personality like characteristic like predisposes you to feeling this way. I think it just manifests very differently.
Thank you. Thank you. As you're talking and Damali was talking, I was just, when she was mentioning the Fortune 500 ladies, and my mind was going like, they're very successful. Is there some link between being a perfectionist and having a severe attack of this syndrome? You know what I mean? I'm just wondering, some people are perfectionists, and yes, for every one perfectionist, one does very well, and then there will be 100 that might crumble with that attitude, either in their personal life or professional life or academic life. From my mental health clinical data. So thank
I was
you.
gonna say, using myself as a sample of one, I am not a perfectionist. But I am a sample of one. So that is not statistically
okay, that's cool.
But I am not a perfectionist.
I'm not a perfectionist, but maybe in my practice, yes, I see people who didn't make it through. So maybe from there, I started to deduct that maybe there's some perfectionism. That's why I kind of throw it to you guys. But it's something that we are going to put a link at the end of this session anyway. And we want our audience to please take that link and read more on some of these things. Okay, we know that this has a strong, we want to rush this because we want to hear from our audience. Many of these have strong mental health implications. Now, we want to hear from our speakers. How do we help ourselves when we find out that we have this problem? How do we help others around us? Because this program is not just for us. It's for our friends, it's for other alumni, it's for our family members, it's for our children. How do we help ourselves and how do we help others if we find ourselves in this ocean or any member of our contact having this particular problem? How do we help us? Maybe, Umbre, do you want to start now?
Yeah, sure. I was just laughing to myself because my very honest answer, something that I've done personally to help myself, deleting social media. And I have a lot of reasons for that. I feel like we're in an era where we have access to everyone else, like every minute of everyone else's lives. And it's unprecedented. And I think that people are learning how to cope with being constantly inundated with other people's like success or failures or things like that, things that can like stimulate anxiety or this imposter syndrome. And I found that it was kind of negatively impacting my mental health, or not even maybe my mental health, but it was kind of throwing me off of my own course. It's easy to get distracted when you're seeing what other people are doing, and then you think, should I be doing that? Am I not doing enough? And should I be applying to things right now in this moment because someone else is? And then you kind of lose sight of your own goals. And so I think that removing social media was very helpful for me. But in that same vein, I think that sometimes a little bit of exposure can be inspiring, and I'm not sure what the line is between imposter syndrome or just being inspired by someone else. But I remember like the summer after my freshman year in college, I went back home to Maryland to shadow a doctor, and then I'm like on Facebook and I'm seeing all of my peers like doing these really cool things abroad, and I'm like, first of all, where did we get the money for that? And second of all, like I want to do that, and like, why am I not doing that? Why am I doing something like at home? Everyone's doing this extravagant thing. And while that could be like just a symptom of imposter syndrome, the next year for my next summer, I was inspired to like look into those opportunities and do those things that I saw people doing that I also genuinely wanted to do. And like seeing other people doing those things kind of like let me know that it was a possibility. It was that I could make a reality. So like a certain level of it is like healthy, I think, in terms of motivation, inspiration. But I think it's definitely a fine line between that and doing things just because you see other people doing them. I think you kind of have to, I don't know, do a little bit of self-exploration, understand what your desires are and your goals are before kind of exposing yourself to those things, so you can't be easily deterred or distracted.
Awesome. Marie-Christine, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'm blown. I mean, there's a lot of wisdom in what Embry just said. And, you know, in particular, you articulated something that I think is quite subtle and is really important to grasp when we're trying to help ourselves or help others, which is that the same exposure can lead you to feel depleted and to feel that imposter syndrome, or to feel like you're missing out, that others are living all of this good life, others have success, but you can't find that sense for yourself. Or in a different situation in your life can lead you to feel inspired and to open your eyes to a new opportunity or to a new way of doing things. And I think that differential effect that it has in part depends on your coping well and your resilience well, right? If your resilience well is depleted in that time, or if you already feel like you're struggling with your sense of self-worth, then you're more likely to interpret the success of others as reinforcement of your own inadequacy. Whereas if you're feeling very confident and just feeling comfortable with who you are, a good sense of your identity, a good sense of perhaps you're thriving and you're happy with things that are not the typical accomplishment. Maybe something else than the mighty dollar makes you happy, go figure. And perhaps you see somebody who just got a promotion in that moment and you're like, good for them. I'm so glad I had my 2-week vacation, even though I didn't have the dollar amount or whatever it is. And so perhaps there is a lesson for care for ourselves and for others in that observation, in that when you feel like the good news or the social media exposure triggers some distress in you, that could be a good signal for self-care. That could be a good signal for you to say, okay, what can I do to turn towards me and to replenish my resilience well first? And perhaps that is taking a step away from social media, time to reorient yourself, recenter yourself to your own sense of who you are and how worthy and wonderful person you are. Lean on to friends, lean on to groups where you feel like you belong, and groups that are inspiring to you in those moments, right? And so I think when you're asking Ngozi about what can we do, what are some protective factors or some strategies, I find that, again, perhaps because of the culture, we have a tendency, or we're often encouraged to take a tunnel vision where work or school is the goal and it's the measure of our success. It is the measure of our value. And it's incredibly short-sighted, right? But it's very real in the structure of society. Our value is very much tied to that. And so one exercise that I like to foster with my mentees or with my clients is to diversify your sense of self. So those of you, I know we have Tuck alumni here, right? We always say it's healthy to diversify your portfolio. Well, think about it, not in terms of investment of dollar, but investment of your mental health. Diversify your investments. You're not just a student. You're not just an executive. You're also a mom, a friend, a cat lover, whatever it is. you have these different facets to you. And when one of these facets is depleted, just like your investment goes down into one stock, you can be very depressed by that. Or you can think, well, what are the other baskets in which I have invested my sense of self-worth, my sense of identity, and my sense of competency? And if you feel like one of them takes you down, try to practice very intentionally reminding yourself of those different, diversified investments, these different facets of yourself, because chances are, even if you gave an essay and you got a bad grade, you didn't become a worse friend for that. So pick yourself up from these other facets of your identity that are still very much contributing to your sense of competency, to your values, to the things that fulfill and inspire you. That would be one recommendation I can share.
Awesome. Damali, do you have anything to add to that? I'm sure you do.
I do. So a couple of things. One of the phrases I like to use is comparison is the thief of joy. So to Embry's point, to Christine's point, make sure that the metrics you are using to define success are yours and yours alone, right? So some people, when I coach people, the first thing I say is, when thinking about what you want to do for your career, be very honest about where you want. Like maybe it's money that you need right now, so you're willing to take a lot, but maybe it's autonomy, maybe it's time, maybe it's I need to know that my work is meaningful. I need to know that my work is moving ways. One of the things I also tell people is, one, acknowledge that you're feeling this way. So journal, talk to a therapist, but also, again, because this imposter syndrome tends to manifest in high-performing individuals, it usually is regulated to one particular area, right? It's usually regulated to work, it's usually regulated to school, it's maybe regulated to a nonprofit. And so I tell people, and I'm going to challenge the audience with this now, to create a brag list. So within the next 7 days, write down 5 accomplishments. And they can be large or small. I think that's one of the other things we tell people, the greatest invention is just slicing the bread. So it does not have to be this very large accomplishment. It could be something that you may have thought of as small, but write down 5 accomplishments. And then the hard part is, now you need to tell them to somebody else. Right? So you have to brag on yourself to somebody else. So I challenge the audience to do that. Set a reminder on your phone for the next 7 days that is your homework assignment. But what that does is it starts to remind you of all of your feelings of worth, of your qualifications, of the fact that, yes, I deserve to be here. Yes, I earned my spot. And so do that periodically. Start to go back, look at your accomplishments, look at what you've done, find people who look like you and who can support you. So my day work is in the energy field. I have a group of people that I talk about the work that we're doing because it's unique to us. Find other people who can support you and understand, so you can release some of those feelings. And I think several of the questions kind of came back to, is this imposter syndrome? Is this culture at a job or a location? Having a group of people that are in the same space can help you figure that out, right? Somebody can tell you, no, that consulting firm is just completely insane. You need to get out, versus, yes, you probably may feel some of that because it's typical in the industry. So again, starting to find those support systems of real life, and again, being encouraged to be open and honest, and that encourages other people to feel open and honest.
Thank you, Damali. Thank you, everybody. There is actually one aspect that I want to mention here, and that is in relationship. I know that all of you had things to say about relationship, but unfortunately, we have to hear from the audience. But let us all be aware that this imposter syndrome happens to us, even in our intimate relationship or relationship with family members. Sometimes we don't feel good enough, not as good as our brothers, our siblings, our friends, our girlfriends, our boyfriends, and it makes us to withdraw from even showing affection because we feel we're going to be hurt, we're not good enough. So we have to really know that this actually touches us in every way. Please, anything not covered, we apologize. We want to hear from you. And it's time to now hand over to Heather and Sarah to help us we could see that the chat was very, very busy as the whole conversation was going on. And, you know, so let's see what happens,
Yes,
what the chat
absolutely.
is telling us. Yeah.
Thank you, Ngozi, and everyone. The chat has been blowing up with wonderful comments and questions. And I just have to say, Damali, thank you for that exercise. Another thing that I do sometimes is I keep a kind notes folder in my email inbox. So anytime I get a nice email, I put it in there. And if I'm having a tough day or I'm doubting myself, sometimes I go back and just review it. So these are little things in terms of that self-care that we can do to take a break. So many wonderful comments. You know, Damali, I am going to ask you a specific questions that we received from an audience member is talk about the professional environment. What happens if your professional environment tends to promote imposter syndrome or doubt about yourself? What to do if you're unable to extract yourself quickly? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, if you're unable to extract yourself, because my first thought, and Heather probably knows this, is I say leave, right? You know, I tell people the worst thing that can happen is they're going to fire me, but it's sometimes that's the blessing. But if you can't, find yourself a good support system. I have been in a job where I was unable to leave, and it was awful. Every day I had to take a break and probably, you know, had my only professional blow up. But I had I had friends, you know, I made sure that I absolutely dug into why am I here? Why am I in this position? You know, why am I staying here? And then set myself a timeline. I think one of the things that we tend to feel when we're in these positions is that if there's no exit plan, set an exit plan, you know, set 90 days. It's very easy to say, okay, I'm going to find a new job. I always say I'm going to find a new job by September 1. And then what do I need to get there, right? Who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to do my resume? So work backwards. But that setting that timeline, even if you miss it, creates what you need to do to be able to make it there.
Awesome. Okay.
In addition to that, so that, Damali, thank you for talking about finding your support system. I'd love to hear from one of the panelists on how can we be that support system. So in the academic world, there's a lot of projects that we're working on in the working world, working in team projects. If someone on your team feels that they don't belong, bring up thoughts that make you think maybe they're experiencing something similar to imposter syndrome, do you have tips on how can we be that support system for them? Anyone can jump in with the answer, with your thoughts.
I found that something that's really helpful is like giving praise in public, like within a group space, saying like, oh, I really like that idea. Like not the saying things that are encouraging in private or like meeting with them afterwards in private and saying like, oh, that was really great. I think like public acknowledgement is really a morale booster. Maybe that's just for me, but I think it's really helpful to know that someone is supporting you and isn't afraid to support you in front of others.
Thank you, Ambre. Sarah, let's move on the questions. Do you have more?
Yes. Oh, yes, we have plenty. But one question that I think is particularly interesting is there anything we should embrace about imposter syndrome? So are there positives that can be, helpful? Maybe it's self-reflection or motivation. It helps you work harder, longer, or think about different possibilities. Either maybe you could speak from your personal experience or just in general about, should we just get rid of it entirely, or are there parts we should really, cherish?
I have a little bit perhaps of a controversial answer or something that I've seen. When we started this talk, we were talking about how there are social determinants that perhaps pressure us to always do the next thing and move very fast. And my students will be familiar with something that I recommend them to embrace in imposter syndrome. It's give yourself the time to really do your best work on one essay a year. because we're in academia, we're all familiar. You do the thing by the deadline, and we all are high achievers. We're all pretty good with executive functions. We can do it. We can do a pretty decent job, in fact, last minute. Most of us can, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be in the places that we are. And so that's the recognition of, okay, you do have the competency to do that. But then what's the impact of this pattern long-term when you end up being kind of last minute, kind of doing it? You did enough to pass, you did enough to do a good presentation, but did you do your best? Did you really show or send out the message, the true, authentic, quality message that you wanted to share and to show in this presentation? You don't have to do that every single time. We have a lot of pressures on our time, on multiple roles that we're fulfilling, but it's important that you don't lose the connection with what your best work truly is, because the reality is if you got here, it's not by happenstance. But you may lose touch with it if you are getting absorbed in this routine of just doing things last minute and doing just good enough to pass. And then you start doubting your true value. You start doubting that you truly have something original to say or something worthwhile to say. And I'd recommend that when you notice that there's one domain where you start doubting your value, ask yourself very authentically, did I produce my best work in this area of my life in the past 6 months? And if you haven't, try to see if you can give yourself the challenge and the gift for one assignment, one project, one meeting, one presentation, whatever it is, to show up at your best for yourself and see the effect that that will have.
I love that. I would just add, there's a great book, The Empress Has No Clothes by Joyce Roche, and she talks about her experience and how she actually, because of the imposter syndrome, she worked her way up to CEO because she kept working harder and working harder and working harder. So there are great examples of how it can be used in a wonderful way.
I'll share that reference right there. There you go.
Thank you, Sarah. We're waiting for more questions.
Yes, so we spoke a little bit about how imposter syndrome, the impact of imposter syndrome, and would someone be able to touch more about how in the academic setting it can impact, how it can impact you? So can it change your learning behavior or have an impact on your learning behavior, impact on grades? And do you see that being more behavioral, or is it actually affecting your intellectual ability?
Oh, I mean, it does. I don't want to monopolize, but in 2 words, it absolutely does, right? And we know that high emotional impact influences cognitive functioning. And so when somebody experiences trauma, somebody experiences high emotional load, it does impact your cognitive functioning, absolutely. If you're stressed out and you see your working memory go down, right? That's this translation from emotional to cognitive. And so in the same way, you can become paralyzed with a sense of a lack of self-authenticity, a lack of self-worth, in a way that then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, where you start self-sabotaging. It's another way of describing it, and your cognitive function no longer perform at the level that they could otherwise.
Are you gonna do, or
we did too much.
Yeah, it's just a test to
I'm
see.
looking for.
Yeah, we are almost on time.
Yep.
So I think, is there any one more question we can take? Then we'll wrap it up, because many of us have just 1 hour to be here.
Just one question, and then to finish it up is, what is something that you wish you could tell your younger self about imposter syndrome, or to avoid, or what is something like, just even if it's just a sound bite, what do you wish you had known or could tell yourself?
How much being a mentor to others could help in that area.
Love it.
And in that vein, how much reaching out to mentors can help.
Yeah, and I have this soundbite that sometimes I use. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. So always have that in mind. As much as we struggle with all this, we also have to know that every other person around us feels that way. I had a session this morning with one of my clients. She did a presentation, short, it was horrible. But she said everybody was telling her it was good, but she was actually crying during session. And it's like everybody felt she did good, but she felt she didn't do good. So I said, because those people don't know more than you do. Because of the way you prepared, you had expectation for you. So sometimes we've set this unrealistic expectation for ourselves, but we don't even know that the others perceive it differently. So we must not allow what others do or what others say to impact us. Some of us, over the years, we've been bullied, we've been criticized, we've been talked down on, so that deflates our self-esteem. And when this kind of thing comes, we start doubting ourselves and start ruminating and thinking about all those years that we couldn't do well, instead of focusing on all the years that we've done very well. So I really want us to be very conscious of it. And I want to seize this opportunity. Unfortunately, we have to wrap this up. But if our speakers will stay on, and some of you want to stay on and ask one or two more questions, that would be great. But I want to say a big thank you to all our speakers for joining us today. We all really benefited from your thoughts on this topic. From our audience, we'd love to know what you think. Unfortunately, we usually have a survey, but
we might follow up by email to share. We might be able to follow up by email to share the survey and to share the resources that panelists have shared today.
Okay, so if you enjoyed our panel today, we'd love to have you become more involved with HUM. There's a link. If you looked, you will see some links that we've already posted for how you can join us. But most importantly, we have events almost every week. And if you go to our website and click on events, you will see the things, the ones we've done already. And in a short while, this particular one will also be on that website, so that you can go and watch it and rewatch it for the number of times you want. For some of you who came in late or left early, of course they have left.
If I can just put in one last plug for Tuck, to any of you who are Tuckies, please know that there are tons of events coming up. Our next one is all about careers in healthcare after Tuck. And again, Sarah and I are both here as supports for Tuck students and alumni, so be sure to reach out. And thank you so much for this terrific partnership.
Okay, and you could also see, if you look on the chat, you will see the Tuck line link, please, okay? So for many of you who are Tuck friends and students, please, your Office of Career, you will see the link, everything. And HUM is a non-profit organization, Harvard Alumni for Mental Health. It's a non-profit. And we are glad we can keep our events free and open to all public. Please, if you would like to donate to support us in our efforts, we will really appreciate it. On behalf of the entire Harvard Alumni for Mental Health team and that one team, we are happy to meet you all today, and we look forward to having a great conversation with you all going forward. Thank you. Thank you, our panelists. Thank you, our audience. Thank you, everybody.